Right. Well, good evening. Thank you
This
all.
meeting is being recorded.
We'll start over. There we go. Good evening. Thank you all for joining us this evening for this very important discussion. And special thanks to our Wheat Ridge Police Department Community Advisory Group, who is on the call this evening for hosting this meeting. I'm Patrick Goff, City Manager for the City of Wheat Ridge. On the call also with me this evening is Chief Chris Murtha, Division Chief Jim Lawrence, Division Chief Dave Pickett, and our Public Information Officer, Sarah Spalding, who will be the moderator for this evening's discussion. We have about 90 minutes scheduled for this call tonight. I want to first take a few minutes to introduce our new police chief and to talk about the vetting and hiring process we used during the recruitment last year. I will then turn it over to Chief Murtha, who will provide a summary of policing policies and procedures in Wheat Ridge. And we will be sure to leave plenty of time at the end to answer any additional questions that were not answered as part of our presentations tonight. So many of you may have known our former police chief, Dan Brennan. Dan retired last year on July 19th after 15 years of service to the city of Wheat Ridge and over 42 years in law enforcement. He was ready to go, I think. Dan had a significant impact on Wheat Ridge and was well respected by our community. So I knew I had some big shoes to fill in replacing him. So I went on a listening tour. Policing has changed substantially over the last decade or so, and I wanted to hear directly from our officers and other police department employees and the community on what the future of the Wheat Ridge Police Department should look like. We also hired Public Sector Search and Consulting. It's a firm that specializes in recruitments for police chiefs to assist our HR department in a robust recruitment and vetting process. Their first task was to reach out to both the community and our employees to gather information through surveys and focus groups on what attributes were important for our next chief. There was a consistent theme in all of the feedback we were receiving, luckily. The next police chief must be a collaborative, inclusive, and engaging leader who has demonstrated track record of transformational leadership. Next, a candidate profile was created based on those attributes, and the recruitment process began. We received 77 applications from all over the country. Our recruitment firm interviewed and conducted initial screenings of the top 39 highly qualified candidates. I personally reviewed those applications and selected 8 to move on to the first round of interviews. We then narrowed that list down to 4 for a second round of interviews, which included a variety of interview panels and an employee and community forum. Mr. Murtha eventually rose to the top as my final candidate. I went to visit Mr. Murtha, then Deputy Chief Murtha, at his former employer, Prince George's County in Maryland. The Prince George's County Police Department is the third largest law enforcement agency in the state of Maryland. More than 1,600 police officers and 300 civilians provide a full range of law enforcement services to nearly 900,000 residents and business owners. Prince George's County is 65% African American and 10% Hispanic. Located in the heart of the Baltimore-Washington corridor, the county borders Washington, D.C., and is just 37 miles south of the city of Baltimore. In his role as Deputy Chief for the Prince George's County Police Department, Murtha served an agency in which the majority of the officers and staff were themselves highly representative of the minority population that makes up the county. This diversity was also reflected by members of the command staff as well as the Prince George's County elected officials. Early in the interview process, Murtha disclosed to our recruiter and myself information about a federal lawsuit filed in a 2018 case against Prince George's County Police, in which he was initially named along with other command staff. The suit was brought by current and former employees, not residents, claiming discrimination in promotions and assignments. Many of the plaintiffs were officers who were terminated or disciplined. Chief Murtha was dismissed from the suit in the first subsequent hearing because none of the plaintiffs alleged he committed a discriminatory act. The terminations that were cited in the case were decisions that held officers accountable for actions that went against department policy. The department maintains a history of holding its officers accountable with discipline and or termination as outcomes of any internal investigation brought as a result of a complaint. Regardless of who I spoke with in Prince George's County, an elderly Black community activist who lives and worked for 3 decades in the community, the senior executive of the Washington Redskins of the National Football League, who Mirtha worked with to provide security at football games, the candidates, supervisors, and subordinates of diverse backgrounds, each relayed the same positive attributes and characteristics about Mirtha. In a separate investigation into the lawsuit, 22 individuals from Prince George's County Police Department and the community were interviewed. Of the 22 people interviewed, every single individual believes the candidate is honest and trustworthy, believes he treats all individuals fair and equally, and evaluates them on their individual performance and not on their appearance, and all believe the allegations in the civil lawsuit are completely baseless without merit. Some of the comments received from that investigation include, "I will shed a tear of sadness for the community when he leaves, but I also shed a tear of joy for him. I love Mirtha. He knows how to treat people and how to talk to people regardless of color or if they are wrong. I like him. He's definitely a keeper. I love the positivity he brings. He has no problem with gender, race, or anything else. One of the best people concerning character I've met in my life and career. The way he interacts and treats people, family, even outsiders has been consistent throughout 30 years. He's the most brilliant police mind of anyone. He finds solutions and provides clear direction and can work his way through any problem. He's the most intelligent boss I've ever worked for. He treats people fair and he's a great boss." After additional background investigations, including a psychological exam and polygraph, Mirtha was selected eventually as the Wheat Ridge Police Chief, due in large part to his many years of experience in law enforcement, and in particular for his very specific expertise working for a large law enforcement agency serving a diverse community. The final selling point for me was the unwavering support I saw he had from everybody in his community and agency. Chief Mirtha is committed to leading the Wheat Ridge Police Department by exemplifying the values identified in the department's mission, which include integrity, respect, courage, perseverance, and initiative, and by serving every person who lives, works, shops, dines, and plays in Wheat Ridge. I have the utmost confidence in Chief Mirtha, and that's why we hired him, and the utmost confidence in our Wheat Ridge Police Department. I'd like to now turn it over to Chief Mirtha, who can talk more about the department and its policing policies and procedures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goff. I appreciate the words, and to everybody who's joined us on the call, thank you for taking the time out tonight to join us in this conversation in this moment in time. I want to start tonight, though, by saying that I reiterate the words that I put out on social media last week. Every member of this Wheat Ridge Police Department, including myself, was disturbed at what we saw happen in Minneapolis 2 weeks ago and the death of Mr. Floyd that resulted at the hands of police. But we're always disturbed when we see bad police behavior. And I've come to find that the people in Wheat Ridge, to a man and woman, never shy away from their responsibility and universally condemn those actions when they see them. Our heart is wounded every time we see bad police behavior. So tonight we're here to discuss with the community concerns that we've heard through questions and through various media outlets. We've gotten questions on policy, procedures, practices, training, bias, basically police business, how we conduct our police business. So tonight I'll ask you to, when we get to the Q&A portion, to keep your questions relevant to that topic. There are other topics in policing, and I'll make myself as available as possible for those questions, but tonight we want to focus on what is a relevant topic in policing right now and in our world. So again, thank you to the Community Advisory Group for willingness to host this town hall. We've had fits and starts with COVID-19, but I've appreciated your commitment to this police department and helping us view ourselves through your lenses. It's very helpful to me, and I know Chief Brennan before me started this and had all the right reasons to do that, and here we sit tonight. So a little bit of housekeeping. Tonight, I'll offer a little bit of information on myself and some of it hopefully is not too repetitive, but some of it will be. We'll take questions that we've collated. Our public information officer, Sarah Spalding, who's our moderator, has collated questions that were submitted. Some of those will be asked by members of our community advisory group, and then some of them our moderator will ask. In many of these cases, there are reoccurring themes or the same or similar questions. So if you don't hear the wording exactly as the way you submitted your question, just understand that in the interest of time, we're not trying to ask every question that might have a slight nuance or a few words difference. We're trying to address the themes that have occurred in many of these questions. And we'll do that for 90 minutes tonight. And time permitting at the end, you'll be able to submit questions for those of you who've tuned in through the Zoom app at the bottom of your screen. Our administrator will receive those questions, and any questions that we don't get to on this call, we will answer those if you resubmit them later to the Wheat Ridge PIO. That's information that I believe is included in our original posting for this meeting. So again, I wish we could do this in person, but COVID-19 has really hampered my ability to get out in the community, and I feel badly about that. However, by way of introduction, for those of you who are meeting me for the first time on Zoom, I am Chief Murtha, and I've been here for about 4 months. I want to thank Mr. Goff and members of the hiring team for investing time to interview, research, and appoint me as the Chief of Police for Wheat Ridge. I want to thank the community and the officers that participated in the process that have been so welcoming to me, and the members of CAG. I appreciate your welcome as well. I've enjoyed my time in Maryland, but coming back to Colorado was a dream that my wife and I have shared for 25 years. We've worked hard to come back here, and we're happy to be here. My prior police experience, as Mr. Goff explained, was for a very large agency in a different environment. I come from the Prince George's County Police Department in Prince George's County, Maryland, often touted as one of the most diverse communities in America. Again, Prince George's County is 65% African American with a very large Latino population, the great majority of which are undocumented. Not only is the community majority minority, but so is the agency, the government, and the county executive. I was proud to work of the work I did in Prince George's County, reducing crime over 65% in 6 years. That's a huge number, and we were nationally recognized for that. Using community-based policing strategies, using constitutional, ethical, and innovative policing strategies. My experiences, often challenging, have led me to be the leader I am here today. Many of those challenges revolved around crime, but also deeply rooted community issues and police-community relations issues. Community issues revolved around issues that are unique to various minority and diversity groups. I feel like I am well-versed in many of those areas. Spending so much time in that diverse community and on an equally diverse agency has given me the opportunity to have insights that have served me well, especially in moments like this. I do not know of many police chiefs or any in Colorado that have had the opportunities that I have had to engage with so many backgrounds as I've had in my career. I consider it one of my strengths in policing. It does not make me better than anybody else, but I have gained so much personal perspective and insight. Many of the residents, pastors, and community activists who took time to tell me what it is they wanted and how they saw the world gave me insight that I lean on today and looking forward. I listen to that community as I am listening very closely to the Wheat Ridge community this evening. The conversation that we're starting tonight is a conversation I've been part of for more than 20 years, actually. I do not feel that these conversations are difficult conversations. I actually feel they're necessary and required in policing. One of the themes that came from my previous conversations on how to produce improved policing was focused on police reform and police accountability. Those are certainly two subjects that we're talking a lot about right now. I've always felt that accountability was important. I know that all communities in America want that same assurance. We all want good police officers, period. End of discussion, right? That's why in Prince George's County, we initiated some very innovative training programs. One of the first agencies in the country to initiate a mandatory implicit bias training program. That was done in conjunction with the University of Maryland. We instituted a number of programs like that, which required officers to take a look at themselves, take a look at their community, take a look at their actions, and held them accountable for those behaviors that were out of line with what the community expectations were. As a management group, we took a very hard line on what we're seeing nowadays called out in many police agencies, right? Police accountability. That hard line resulted in some actions, as Patrick alluded to. Those actions certainly resulted in the termination of several people and discipline to others. And I was named in a discrimination lawsuit around that. And as Patrick said, I was removed as the first order of business by the judge in that case. I don't begrudge anybody for filing a lawsuit because I understand that people of marginalized communities are looking for answers, and it's sometimes difficult to know where discrimination and racism exist. People are trying to find answers anywhere, and that can lead down many paths. The lawsuit was certainly difficult to have associated with my name, as I think I'm quite the opposite of that. But certainly that will be up to other people to examine as I move forward in my career. I think Mr. Goff understood that from so many people he encountered during the vetting process. Accountability was the right thing and the right message, and it's always the right thing to do. It will be part of the Wheat Ridge Police Department. I will continue to support the efforts of everyone who feels marginalized or is marginalized, because my life has given me the opportunities to know and interact with so many people who I respect that make it impossible for me not to see them as, or not to want to see them have a life as good as the one I have. We're all human and we all want the same things. Well, I would have preferred to have this meeting in person. I did not want to wait to bring this information and answer questions from my community. This is an important topic we are dealing with right now in this moment, and we hear real concern in the community. We've received many inquiries about our policies, procedures, practices, etc. I want to start this part of the conversation by saying that the men and women of the Wheat Ridge Police Department are incredibly professional, service-oriented, and just exceptional people, both sworn and civilian. I'm proud of the work they do every day. And I hear that regularly from the community who ask me to pass that message on. And I'm confident that we would never have an issue of the type we're seeing on the news far too frequently, I might add, here in Wheat Ridge, because we're constantly evolving, constantly examining ourselves, constantly training, constantly striving to be the most ethical and progressive agency we can be, mostly because this agency takes action. We've heard the frustrations of marginalized community with respect to words versus action. And I'm here to tell you that Wheat Ridge has already put into place many of the concepts that legislatures are contemplating for agencies that are far behind the progressive Wheat Ridge Police Department and the men and women of this agency. Some of the issues that have been raised repeatedly are issues that I can touch on, and based on the questions that we've received. Recently, we've seen a rise in the hashtag 8 can't wait. These are 8 police reforms that agencies should undertake to reduce deadly encounters. I don't know where this hashtag started, but I will suggest to you that many of the reforms that are being contemplated for police agencies throughout the country cause most police administrators to react negatively. But when I saw this one, these are common sense, they're common sense policing issues that we've already started to undertake in Wheat Ridge. For those of you who aren't familiar with the 8 can't wait, the 8 issues that are raised there are to ban chokeholds, to require de-escalation, require warning before shooting, exhaust all other means before shooting, a duty to intervene, ban shooting at moving vehicles, require use of force continuum, and require comprehensive reporting. I'm here to tell you, though we haven't completed all 8 of them, we're well on our way to most of them, and well ahead of many of our peers, if not most or all of them. So let me address those issues one at a time, since we received so many questions about the 8 can't wait. Ban of chokeholds. Chokeholds are unauthorized in Wheat Ridge. They haven't been used, trained, or been part of Wheat Ridge in decades. Not in any memory of our 30-plus year law enforcement executives, Division Chief Pickett and Division Chief Lorenz can remember, and they're certainly not in our policy. I will suggest that our policy doesn't strictly identify chokeholds as banned. We can do that, but there was a decision made that we couldn't identify every single action that an officer shouldn't do. Rather, we would advise officers what they could do. But that seems to be a very pertinent issue right now, and we have no problem illustrating or demonstrating some of the use of force that certainly has come up on video that's intolerable. So absent that line in our policy is extremely strong on force and how we can use it. Requiring de-escalation, certainly that's the foundation for our success. Annual training is required. We do it every year. And I think the reason that the Wheat Ridge Police Department has such a low use of force usage rate is because officers are so good at de-escalating. Day in and day out, as I read reports or communicate with the officers, there are instances where officers would be legally justified to use force by every account, and they find ways not to. And it's through this de-escalation training. Require warning before shooting. Police officers in Wheat Ridge train on communication, constant verbal communication. They train on it in the firearms, they train on it in use of force. I will suggest it's not always possible. Sometimes dynamic situations where a gun is involved do not afford officers the time to tell somebody that they're about to be engaged with gunfire. However, I believe the policies we have in Wheat Ridge are strong enough that officers understand that they are to do everything they need to do. The policies state that before they utilize a firearm. Exhaust all other means before shooting. Almost the same answer applies there. Our use of force continuum is applied in every instance where an officer believes that they may have to use force. They strategize before they get out of their car. They're beginning to think this thing through. And so many times, again, they've been able to avoid using force through good communication, through good skills, through great tactics, and good leadership, by the way. Duty to intervene. This duty to intervene has been in the works in the Wheat Ridge policy for over 6 months. This is something we're going to put in policy. We've already brought it to the officers, many of the officers, and it's about to happen. So really a not issue. Ban shooting at moving vehicles. It's prohibited to shoot at moving vehicles in Wheat Ridge unless very certain circumstances arise. So it's hard to be completely black and white in policing. It's hard to say you can and can't do something when some situations are so dynamic. I know it over illustrates the point, but a truck loaded with commercial grade dynamite headed towards a school would require an officer to take action. They should never have to think twice that they would be judged for something that was illegal. It's part of policing. So we don't shoot at moving vehicles. We haven't shot at moving vehicles, and for the best of our records research, it's been many, many years since that has happened in Wheat Ridge. Require use of force continuum. We have one. We've had it for over 30 years. If you want to talk about a progressive agency, agencies that are right now trying to find a use of force continuum, this one's had it for 30 years. Requiring comprehensive reporting. Comprehensive reporting it's a little unclear exactly what that particular mandate is requiring, but I can tell you that we have software that tracks our use of force. It tracks our complaint system, and we have a robust system of review that is all detailed through our AIM reporting system. So where other folks may do that by paper, we have a system that requires supervisors to review and look through that, and officers are required to take any report that's brought to their attention. So there's no turning reports away or dismissing them. That's how we work. Other questions that have been brought, use of body-worn cameras. Body-worn cameras have been part of Wheat Ridge for a year now. This was authorized by the City Council, and every officer is required to wear them and turn them on under policy whenever they're engaged in arrests or citizen interaction that may become contentious. Extensive training. In most areas, we double the hours of training required. And I know some of you might have more questions about that. We're a CALEA certified agency. That means an outside entity looks at our police department every year, I believe since 2011. Our policies and procedures, we've started to become transparent and publish as many of those online as we can. There's no reason to hide those from the public. People have asked about them. Where can they find them? Just go to the Wheat Ridge homepage. How many uses of force did we have in last year? Last year we had 19 uses of force total. Almost all of those are at the lowest levels of force, and that's for 39,000 total calls. Our total use of force percentage is 0.05 hundredths per call. In one instance, the International Association of Chiefs of Police were brought in under Chief Brennan to review the Wheat Ridge Police Department and found that we do too much training. That was a notation that they made. I've never been around an agency where somebody said you do too much training, and that's a cry we see in the streets now, better training. That's why Wheat Ridge is in the position it is. Total of over 4,000 hours of training last year for our, what was 85 sworn officers. We have annual anti-bias training, ethics training, arrest control, de-escalation, firearms, and use of force. All questions that were asked. What types of training do you do? These are annual training events. Another question that was asked is, what was our response to assisting mutual aid with Denver during the recent riots, and what did we do down there? We were requested to assist. Mutual aid is something that's requested when the host agency believes that an event may exceed their capacity to handle it. In this instance, Denver anticipated the large protests that did arrive. We did go for 2 days down in Denver. On the Sunday that we were down there, we did not deploy. We staged in the parking lot for the entire day. On the first Saturday of the protest, we did deploy. We went out and we held a position down close to the Capitol. Our officers engaged with nobody. We did not use any force. We did not deploy any less lethal or any other weapons. And I commend our officers in the face of some very vile language directed towards them, bottles and rocks. And aside from a few broken windows and dents to our vehicles, we didn't respond. We didn't use any force, and we used the utmost professionalism. So for the folks who asked questions about our Denver response, that was the entirety of our mutual aid there. No officers were injured. And again, we didn't affect any arrests, and we didn't engage anybody down there. We simply provided direction for folks to walk on another side of a street. And then we assisted fire department to help them, to provide security for them as they put out fires throughout the city. So let me close and say that Wheat Ridge, while Wheat Ridge is not closing, but close this part of it before I start going through more of the questions. But while Wheat Ridge is not an overly diverse community, I can say that the interactions I've seen and those that I have evaluated are extremely professional, and the measures that we have in place confirm that. The Wheat Ridge Police Department values diversity and values every individual that lives, works, travels, or recreates in Wheat Ridge. It starts with our hiring process and the people we select, and it never ends. We are here to listen tonight and address your concerns. We are part of this community. We do not take our role in this community lightly. We value the authority vested in us, and we are committed to constantly evaluating ourselves. So that's why we're here tonight. So I know that members of the Community Advisory Group have some questions. Sarah, if you'd like to prompt those questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Turn my mic on.
There you go.
We had a few that came in on email, and so we can probably start with those. And then we've got a few that have come in as Chief, you've been speaking tonight. So
Do we have, from our Citizens Advisory Group, do we have questions from?
Sure, let's start with those.
Okay.
So why don't we start with Amy? Amy, if you'd like to unmute and ask the question, that would be great.
I think you kind of touched on this, Chief, and I also wanted to take a moment just to thank you for joining us again tonight and for your transparency and compassion and leadership in this time. I really appreciate that the department is taking this step and having this meeting. So thank you for joining us. I think you touched on this, but what is the investigation process used about the complaints of use of force? And I guess kind of a follow-up question to the statistic you shared about the 19 uses of force out of the 30-something thousand. What qualifies as a use of force in those? And then like, what does that process look like for the department to follow up with those?
Yeah, so we have a very strict use of force policy. I think it's 501, although I'm getting used to all the numbers here. In that policy, anytime an officer uses any force that's touching on all the way up to deadly force, those would be investigated as a use of force. That would include a supervisor review of that, and that would matriculate through the chain as part of the review process. But in any complaint that was handled by the Wheat Ridge Police Department, our professional standards unit, sergeant assigned to our professional standards unit would receive those complaints, and those complaints would be reviewed, and that review would determine what exactly the complaint was, identify that, and those complaints then come to me, and then it's determined whether those things need to be routed to different entities to review or to investigate those complaints. In rare cases, we go outside of Wheat Ridge Police Department for investigations. In cases involving deadly force, there is a requirement that we go outside of the Wheat Ridge Police Department. And those cases are under the jurisdiction of the district attorney. While they use police investigators, the district attorney and an outside entity would review any officer in Wheat Ridge who was involved in a shooting. But complaints are taken by every officer, whether they're bias-based or use of force complaints, and they're all funneled through our professional standards unit, and then they are either investigated by that sergeant or a supervisor on the police department.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay. Ron? Don't forget to unmute, Ron.
I'm smiling during serious thing.
There we go. The favorite line in this. Am I on? Sure. Okay. Chief Murtha, thank you, by the way, for your overview. What I'm going to do is just make a few comments, and I don't know that they're always going to be in form of questions, but if it poses any question for you, please feel free to answer. First of all, I've only known you a few months, and I'm very impressed by your background and the way that you've come into this community. I knew Chief Brennan for 15 years, and had a lot of talks with the chief, the former chief. I think that what I like both about you, and you're already saying you're doing it, is I'd rather see you proactive than reactive. And by that, I mean, I really like the community mindedness where you get involved in the community as far as service clubs and other activities where people see the policeman more than just as a policeman. I have police in my family. My brother-in-law was a 30-year Denver policeman, helicopter pilot. And I always said that these policemen were a father, a mother, a brother, a sister. They have children. They have a home. They pay tax. They're just like us. They're just like us. And so I don't like to treat them any different. I've not ever noticed anything in over-policing that I've seen. And I've really felt everyone that I've dealt with from you down through the other chiefs and on down is nothing but professionalism. A couple of things, Chief, that I'd like you can either speak to or that are real close to my heart. One is schools, and I know we have some SRO officers, and I know all of them, I think, but I really would like to see that we make an effort through the budget process, maybe to even get more SRO. I think there's such a great thing that can happen in schools with young children, young people's relationship to an officer, and then as they grow up from there. Second is, I know we have homeless, and then maybe you could speak to that a little bit. My wife and I go down on Clear Creek and walk, and I know that's a constant situation down there. That's kind of the favorite place that I see. And then most importantly, a lot of stuff that I see that involves the police is based in mental health. And I really wanted to know if you have some thoughts about maybe taking some of that mental health or more of it to more specialists in mental health. I don't know whether the policemen are more generalist or are they specialists enough to handle mental health issues, whether it be schools or et cetera. And I think most of the homeless have mental health issues too. At least that's been my experience. I was in the public sector, as you know, Chief. We talked about that. So in general, I would tell everyone, hopefully that are calling in, let's pump the brakes a little bit. Let's take a deep breath. I think you guys are doing a great job, you men and women in your department. And I know there's been a lot of press. And I really think that we need to give the new chief nothing but support. He's been here 4 months. I think he's on top of it from what he's saying, and to just move forward. And I think we need more involvement by citizens, and not so much complaining, but getting involved in some way, shape, or form. And maybe you'll speak to that. You may have some other opportunities for people. This committee that was formed by Chief Brennan, I've really enjoyed that and getting to meet you and really see it from a little different perspective. I also went through the police academy and through the citizens academy, so that was a experience that I will soon not forget. So unless I formed any of those in questions, Chief, I'm mainly really supporting you and your entire staff.
Well, there's a few. Thank you, Ron. First, thank you for the support and the comments. And I think I speak for the men and women of Wheat Ridge when I say thank you. They need support in this moment. It's a difficult moment for many of them. Mm-hmm. Let me first address the SROs. That's certainly become a topic of conversation around the nation, whether police should be in schools. Personally, I believe that the first interaction that a young adult or teenager has with police should be on neutral turf in a positive environment. So I fully support. We have two of the best. We have two of the best right now. And I hear that from everybody. Before COVID-19 shut me down from the community, cut me off a little bit, I was able to go and visit many of our principals. So to your point, yes, schools are important. It was one of my first stops on my tour. And they all spoke so highly of our SROs. I'm happy to say that we do have a few folks in the academy still that were there before COVID hit, and we do plan on assigning not one of them, but somebody from the department, another person as an SRO. So if the community supports SROs, and I think they do, in the school community part of that, we will increase it by at least one. So that's on our radar. Homeless, I think. I couldn't look at Mr. Goff's face, but this morning he discussed our hiring of a homeless navigator. So, Wheat Ridge Police Department, we tout ourselves as being progressive, but I will say Wheat Ridge government is crazy good. I come from a big government. This one is nimble, fast, and they identify problems and they solve them. And there's a great staff. So this morning, Mr. Goff, I think, announced, and I don't want to speak for you, Patrick.
Yeah, I can speak to that if you like, Chief.
Yeah, sure.
It's interesting. I saw a report last night too about, police departments over the last couple of decades, I think, have been asked to do more and more and deal with more and more, right? And sometimes without the necessary funding. And I'd like to talk about the mental health one too, but I think mental health is one of the biggest gaps we have in our communities right now, and our police officers have to deal with it. I've talked to some of our police officers where they interact with individuals who have some mental health issues, and the hospital won't take them, or the fire department comes if they're injured, they won't take them. We have no place to take them. So that's my personal opinion. I think mental health is a huge issue. But back to homelessness. We are working on a regional approach on our homelessness issues. It's becoming a bigger issue in Jefferson County. We are working with the county and all the municipalities in Jefferson County, and we're creating a regional regionalized homelessness navigator program. So the Jefferson County has hired the regional coordinator. They also have a navigator position. And then all the cities in Jefferson County are hiring individual homelessness navigators. They're all going to work together as a team to help provide resources and direct the homeless individuals to the places they need to get those resources. We in City of Wheat Ridge has not hired ours yet. City Council approved a half-time position in this year's budget. The other bigger cities were able to hire full-time positions, so they took all of our candidates. And but I do have a meeting tomorrow with the cities of Golden and Edgewater, who have not hired a position yet either. And we're going to look at combining forces and hire either one or two positions to serve our three cities. So we are working on that.
So I'll just comment on mental health, because I agree with what Mr. Goff said. You know, our police officers are great, and they're great at a lot of things, but we ask them to do many, many things. Being mental health specialists, I think they would all agree they're not mental health specialists. They get a fair amount of training around it, and we certainly are good at being the first responders, especially now in the COVID environment where all services are shut down. There is no option, and it almost seems inhumane sometimes that we don't have options in mental health to help these folks out. I use a term, I stole it from my former chief, but enthusiastic amateurs. We're very good at policing. We're very good at a lot of things. But society is asking us to do things that are maybe a little bit outside of our primary role. And in those instances, we become good at it by default, but not great. And you know, I don't want to disparage our officers in the way they handle themselves, because they do very well, but there's not a lot of people standing there wanting to help us out. So that's another, you know, that's an issue that certainly I think we all need to work hard to address and find solutions for. So thanks for your questions, Ron. I don't know if I answered them all. Thanks for your support, and I look forward to in-person meetings and going from there and hearing from you folks. Sarah?
Thanks, Ron, and Chief. Just wanted to remind folks on the call that are either listening in by phone or on the Zoom video conferencing, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and type your question in there, and once we get through a few more from our committee, we're going to take a look at those questions as well. So just a reminder, that's the only feature and capability for asking questions this evening, is to use that Q&A function. I also did want to read one of those, Chief, because it's related to the question that Ron just asked about schools. And the person listening in tonight said, "We have worked really hard to raise funds and provide a school resource officers at our schools. For most students of many backgrounds, it is the first time they meet a police officer in a positive way. The relationships and conversations these officers have with our youth are invaluable. Can we please make sure we keep those inside our schools? I can't think of a better learning experience for both to get to know one another. Thank you." Just wanted to read that because I thought it was relevant.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate the comment. You know, I learned very early in my career that police officers only have the power and authority that the community invests in them, and that's based on trust. If people don't trust us with their kids, we're in a bad place in policing. I want to be in the schools. I want our SROs in the schools because I think it's important for the outcomes that many of these young people have when they interact with the police. But society will decide whether that's the right place to be or not. The residents of Wheat Ridge will communicate that to us, and we'll react to that. I hope we continue in the schools. I hope we are more robust in our presence in the schools, because I think we do it the right way. We pick the right people for those positions, and they engage in the right way with our young folks. So thanks for that, Sarah.
Chief, I just want to follow up with that. So I'm actually one of the principals at Compass Montessori for the Wheat Ridge campus and the Golden campus. And we've actually worked for the last 4 or 5 years with Officer Schroeder, one of the SROs on a community service project with our elementary school kids on Valentine's Day every year. And I think Sarah has probably posted some pictures each year. It's been a great opportunity, but the officers have been incredible working with the kids, and also just, going out to properties and vetting if it's safe or not, and connecting with residents and helping the kids connect with the community. And that's, I think sometimes, people think of SROs, and I guess I should say too, my father is actually a lieutenant in a similar sized department in the St. Louis area. So I have a lot of background with both education and policing. And I think looking for more opportunities to connect police outside of just that, like, kind of stereotypical SRO role is something that I would love to see happen and support. But I've appreciated the partnership with the Wheat Ridge Police with Compass in the past as well. So
Thank you. And I don't think I made it by there. I hit the public schools first. I apologize. And
come on by.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amy. And just to clarify a little bit, we have two roles in the police department that are a little bit different. One is our community service officers, and the other is our school resource officers. And Phil is the supervisor for our community service officers. So this is a project near and dear to his heart and his team. So they do go out every year. And it's a great program, engaging community members who need a little extra help with some projects around the house, like cleaning out leaves and branches. And the kids really dig in there and do a wonderful job. Dawn, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Thanks for all the chiefs for joining us today, and to all the community members that are joining us as well. I would just offer to the community members that if you're not aware that Wheat Ridge PD has the opportunity of signing up for officer ride-alongs, and I think that's really a great opportunity for all of us. I had the opportunity to do an officer ride-along last summer. And it's really a firsthand experience to see what our officers are really doing. I know that we on this committee have really talked about that. It's our responsibility as citizens to get to know our police as much as it is their responsibility to get to know us. So that's an opportunity that I would put out there. The question that we have is, and you alluded to this earlier, when we have other jurisdictions that ask for Wheat Ridge to provide mutual aid. In those situations, when our officers go in there, what is the command structure that they're under? Are they expected to be following the Wheat Ridge police policies, or are they following under the command of the jurisdiction that's requested their help?
Yeah, so excellent question given our current environment. Mutual aid is governed by Colorado statute, Colorado law. So that concept is codified under law, but there is a lot of flexibility for the requested jurisdiction as to whether they respond operationally, whether they can help. And it is policy in Wheat Ridge that we follow our rules. That's what we train under. So we don't change our rules based on the different environment. Mutual aid can be requested, as I alluded to earlier, anytime an incident or an issue exceeds the capacity of the host jurisdiction, but it's not a requirement that Wheat Ridge respond or go. It's conversation, in Denver that I did have with Mr. Goff, and I think we agreed that we would help our neighbor in that instance, and they would probably, I'm sure, do the same for us. The command structure there, I can tell you this: I was in Denver. I go with the officers. It's sometimes unusual or viewed as unusual, but I think it's a critical moment. So whoever was in charge, if it wasn't me, whatever command officer was in charge there would have the authority to say no to any request that we were uncomfortable with. I think that's a good point to make in terms of your question. If we're uncomfortable with a decision now, in the instance last weekend, Denver would ask us, can you take a position here? Can you take a position there? And before we did, we would have that discussion. and make sure we were comfortable. It wasn't usually a long discussion because they weren't asking us to do much of the sort of upfront work. It was a lot of behind the scenes and logistical work. So it was easy to help in those circumstances. But understand that as a chief, I'd always be involved in those decisions. And there would always be a direct line to our division chief and to myself, and we would all have a conversation if it was something we were uncomfortable with. Thanks for the question, Dawn.
Thanks, John. Diana, is there anything you'd like to ask of the chief tonight?
Yes, and Patrick, let me just say, just as an aside up front, I wasn't able because I was out of town to go to the meet and greet for the finalists, but I did take a look at Chief Murtha's resume and the kinds of things that he had been involved with, and I have to say that I'm just thrilled that you picked the perfect person to lead the city in 21st century policing strategy. So. And after having a conversation with him, it just solidified my position in that. Secondly, I just like to just to take another position on SROs. I too was an elementary principal, and I saw SROs in the schools, and I think SROs can be a really good thing, but I think we have to be very careful that we don't begin criminalizing knucklehead behavior from high school kids, because I have seen too often where high school principals in particular have abdicated their responsibility for bad behavior with students and turning it over to the police or the SRO, who ends up writing them a ticket. They end up having to go to court, and now they're in the system. So I think we have to be very careful about the role of an SRO and ensuring that that kind of behavior does not become perpetuated in the schools and in the lives of young people who make bad decisions. And high school kids are known for making stupid decisions. So I think we have to be careful on what we do with the decision making of the SROs. Having said that, I'm going to ask a question. I think it's around body cameras. And I think, Chief, you already addressed the issue that for the last year, Wheat Ridge has implemented and purchased body cameras. So my question is two-part. Number one, do we have body cameras now for all officers? And number two, have we begun implementing consequences if they don't turn them on?
Yep. So if I can comment first on the SRO comment that you made, and I'll be brief, but I agree wholeheartedly. Thank God there wasn't an SRO in my high school. I might not be here in front of you today for my knuckleheaded behavior. It's half a joke. I'm not sure if my wife would think it was a joke, but I think that leads us to a bigger issue. The most consequential policies for Wheat Ridge Police Department are things that I'm looking at right now and have been looking at. Wheat Ridge, wasn't out of line when I got here. Chief Brennan and the division chiefs did a great job, but it's time for us to revisit the policies. And SRO policy I'll add to that list, because I think there's things we can mitigate and eliminate before we give kids a criminal record just because the officer happened to be there. And abdication of responsibility is something I'm very familiar with. And I've had that difficult conversation with many a principal, that this is not our responsibility. We are here to engage and build relationships, not to be an occupying force in a school. So I wanted to comment on that before I talked about body-worn cameras. We have Commander Hunt here, who's taken our body-worn camera program and turned it into really a fantastic part of this police department. We're actually in our second phase of cameras, if you can believe it. We're on, I think, on what they call the Axon third generation camera. And we've recently increased our storage to unlimited, where we were constrained before, and we had to get rid of or put on DVD some of our old footage. But now we're able to have it. So every officer in patrol, every supervisor has a body-worn camera, and they're being issued new ones this week, which was, as you can imagine, had to be planned well ahead of this. So we've been very progressive with body worn cameras. And while they're not a panacea, they don't offer an insight into every action. The public does feel more comfortable to know that they're there. Officers under policy are required to activate them on a very certain situations. And if they don't, yes, they do face discipline for failure to record on their personal video devices or body worn cameras. So I hope those answer those questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. I think that was everyone that wanted to ask a question.
Sarah, I have some of the questions that are still, I don't know if we've answered them, that I had that were submitted ahead of time.
Okay.
Did you want to go through those or not?
Sure, I think that'd be a great place to start. And I'm just going to, again, ask for patience with the folks that have submitted questions to our Q&A button.
Yep.
We will get-
Pardon me, I just had a quick question for the chief.
Yeah.
This is regarding the mutual aid.
Yep.
So if there's an officer from some other municipality that comes in to help Wheat Ridge out, what kind of authority do you have if they start acting out of alignment with, let's just say, for instance, their city isn't as rigorous. Their city is not plagued with the overtraining problem, and you need to lean on them, or God forbid, if they do something that is way out of line and there's an involved lawsuit, what's the city of Wheat Ridge's responsibility or accountability for that officer's behavior?
Yeah, mutual aid requests are done through the highest ranking official on each agency. We would rescind the request and ask that agency to return to their jurisdiction immediately. Obviously, if there was behavioral issues, we would report those issues. I mean, that's unquestionably, in my mind, what would happen in Wheat Ridge. It's not, I want to be clear, the Jefferson County, Denver area, this metro area, policing here, and I've been to a few places, is excellent. It's excellent police work. But, we do watch each other closely, and we have a responsibility to our citizens here in our city. And I take that personally. And if somebody came here because they thought they had some kind of anonymity and could act in a way that was out of line with our principles and values, I wouldn't hesitate to send them back, and we do without. So I hope that answers your question.
Guys.
Yep. Sarah, I know we have a fair amount of questions coming through the Zoom app. So if I run through these ones a little quicker, does that work for us? The questions I already have?
I think that'd be great. We've got about a half an hour left, Chief.
Okay, so forgive me for speaking quickly or for paraphrasing some of these, but these are questions that came in and fair to answer them first. If an officer trainee observes what they consider to be excessive use of force by another officer or their field training officer, is there a mechanism to report it without retribution? Absolutely. Again, I think I've explained the process, but each Wheat Ridge Police Department officer is required. It's not an option. They don't get to decide whether they want to or not. They're required to report excessive use of force. As a matter of fact, that's in Colorado revised statutes that they report uses of force. The department has an early warning system as well that would flag people, but how we would handle an officer, a young officer, and I understand what the question is getting at, is we would obviously remove them as far as away from that individual as we could to avoid retribution, and we would certainly assign a senior officer to oversee that individual's continued training and ensure that nobody tries to reach out and influence that person or engage that person in any negative way, but that person is allowed to continue their career. As a matter of fact, we celebrate officers who get involved and try and do the right thing. We encourage that type of behavior, and we've had several instances of that. So that's an answer to that question. I covered the question, what topics do we cover in our annual training for the most part, but let me go through because I missed a few. anti-bias, arrest control. This is annual training, driving skills, firearms, CPR, ethics, law and legal updates, community policing, our use of force simulator training, use of force, body-worn cameras, mental health issues. We discussed mental health issues, but we do train on it yearly. Crisis recognition and response, crisis intervention training. 40 hours, by the way, is required at the beginning of your career in crisis intervention training within the first 3 years of attending the academy. Now, that's a Wheat Ridge specific. That's not a post requirement police officer standards and training. That's something we require. Officers do that. Next question I had, how many use of force incidents were reported in 2019? I think I answered that. There were 19 reported incidents termed level 3, which is control and constraint. In layman's terms, use of our hands to guide people or to use certain pressure point control techniques that are nationally recognized. So not impact weapons, not high level of uses of force. A question, what type of community engagement activity is the department involved in during the year? Each member of the command staff serves on community service organizations, the type 501c3 type organizations, and they may engage in any number of community events or collaborations, including homelessness initiatives. Department hosts fundraising annually for such causes as Special Olympics, breast cancer, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Alzheimer's disease, child abuse prevention. We have Coffee with a Cop events. I've been to a few of those before COVID shut it down. Thanks, John Bowman, for that. Those are held at different locations throughout Wheat Ridge, and also our National Night Out in August. Our crime prevention unit, excellent unit, by the way, outstanding, also presents classes on personal safety, neighborhood watch program, and the dog walker watch program. Our patrol is engaged with our community, issuing free ice cream tickets to children. They spot wearing bikes, and we encourage just that type of behavior. I can go on and on and on, but those are some of the things we're doing. And birthday parades whenever we can operationally make it now, because kids are cooped up in their houses and they're not getting enough notoriety on their birthdays. So we help out there when we can. I think I talked a little bit about what type of oversight is there for Wheat Ridge. CALEA, the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. That's a reviewing body that we voluntarily submit our documents to and our policies to for review to make sure they meet at least national best practices. And most of ours exceed that, as well as our CERT review of shootings. I've discussed that, and some of the other things I've already discussed. So in the interest of time, I'll kind of push through that. How do residents submit a complaint or commendation to an officer whom they've had an interaction? So again, every officer is required by state law to provide a business card to anyone with whom they have an interaction with, unless that interaction resulted in an arrest or ticket. In those cases, contact information, name and badge number are included on the police reported ticket. A complaint or commendation form is available online. Customer surveys are also sent randomly to districts of Wheat Ridge following calls for service. The data is compiled and provided in our annual report, which again is posted on our Wheat Ridge Police homepage. So there's several mechanisms to accomplish that. What is the question is, what is the department city's position on Senate Bill 217? For those of you who are not aware, this is the Senate bill on police accountability, integrity. And it has a lot of provisions in there that have a lot of impact on what the future policing may look like. I can suggest to you that I think, even the city, and I won't speak for Mr. Goff, but we're all reviewing it because it has an impact on the city as well. And we're trying to digest it, and it's constantly changing. I believe today it did pass through the Senate on its way to the House. So I haven't had a chance in preparation for this to look at the final version of it. There are certainly some items in there that cause a lot of angst to police executives because of what their impact will be, not just on the community, but on our officers as well. So as we look through that and we gather together as a community, but also as police professionals, we look to try and guide that document to what we believe is the best outcome. So I don't have a position on the overall bill because parts of it are okay. They want to include mandatory intervention, which I've already suggested is something we're willing and want to do. We're going to do it here regardless. So there are parts that we will do, whether or not this bill passes. There are other parts that were done, I think, a little bit hastily and needed to be reviewed. And as stakeholders, we wanted a seat at the table, and I think we're starting to get that. So I don't know if Mr. Goff has any comments on the bill.
Maybe, yeah, just real briefly, as Chief Murtha mentioned, I did look at the amended version today that passed the Senate, and it is changing daily. And there was a lot of strikeouts and a lot of added language. But I believe the overall intent of the bill is good and needed. And as Chief Murtha mentioned earlier, we're doing most of those things already. But yeah, we just want to make sure that there's nothing in there. This bill was put out very quickly, which I think it's a good thing. We need to get some language out and have community discussions about it. And they're doing the same thing at the federal level, but we want to make sure there's things in there that don't impact the community in an adverse way that we're not thinking about. And so I think overall, though, the intent of the bill is good.
Thanks for that. I'll move on, and if anybody has specific questions about that in the follow-up Q&A, we'll look to answer those. Is there a time specified in departmental policy by which body camera footage will be released? Body camera footage will be available for release after 72 hours unless otherwise restricted by an order of the district attorney. In general, we've turned around almost all of the requests that met that guideline within 72 hours. So we generally turn around our body camera footage where it doesn't result in arrest or an upcoming investigation. We turn that footage around very quickly compared to our peers. I think we talked about chokeholds and carotid compression. That was a question I believe answered. And we talked about hours of training. That was a question that I believe we answered. And then does Wheat Ridge have a strategic plan? Is a question that was answered. Every 3 years, we create a strategic plan for the police department. This year, we'll be creating a new one. And there will be, we will look closely to address issues around community relations in the police department in answer to that. And we will continue to look for anti-bias outlets in our strategic plan that help our community. So that was a question on strategic plan. What actions will you take to ensure our police department reflects the diversity of the community? It's a good question, and it's a difficult question. You know, we want to make sure we have qualified applicants. We want to make sure that we reach out and we look outside, inside of our community, everywhere we can to find applicants of all diversity that reflect what Wheat Ridge's diversity is, and really what reflects the metropolitan area, because Wheat Ridge is a cosmopolitan city, right? We're right on the edge of Denver, and folks pass through on I-70, and we have businesses here, and we have people who work here, and you know, a robust economy, and so we want to be reflective of the metropolitan area, which is even you know, more diverse than what Wheat Ridge is, because we want to reflect that. And the way to do that is, you know, is we have to fight for those folks who are qualified and give them a reason to come to Wheat Ridge. And, you know, we're just in the process of reviewing our recruitment strategy and going to the places where we can find folks and let them know of the opportunities that we have here. And I think, you know, we have a lot of good selling points in Wheat Ridge, but it's going to be, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We're fighting, you know, other jurisdictions for the same qualified people. And, you know, sometimes it comes down to money. Sometimes it comes down to environment. And we've got to make ourselves more attractive to more diversity. We know that. That's a reflection point for this police department. And we know we have to get better in that. So that was a question. I think the last, I'm sorry, I have one more question. A police officer can have many different roles. Some officers may not be suited for every role as a police officer. For example, one officer might be suited to break down a door for a drug bust, but that same person may not be best to talk to someone who needs more mental health advice. Do you train for specific roles, a specific role is something you guys look for in new recruits? My answer to that is no, not specifically in recruits. We look for qualities in recruits, but they're across the board qualities. Certainly we look for character, ethics, and we look for people who are able to mentally handle this job, good communication skills. When folks go to specialty units, when we review people for specialty units, we certainly look at their individual qualifications and we look at what their abilities are, and we try and match those up with the job and have the best outcome. We certainly want to expose people to different jobs, so we don't want to limit people. We know they can develop in those jobs, and we don't want to create any barriers for folks to be there. But I believe every officer who works for Wheat Ridge is capable of every job, and that may be overly optimistic, but I believe if people apply themselves here, we've hired some of the best people and they can do that. I have no problem saying that, the folks who work here could do any job. And they could do any job outside of policing, but they've decided that they want to serve the community. So kudos to those folks, especially the ones who are just starting their career in this tough environment. So that one may have been my last one. I'm sorry, there's one more. I believe the use of force policy should be amended to remove any chokeholds or knees to the back, also any blows to the head by baton or fist, period, as policy states unintentionally. I understand what that question is getting at. The problem we have in policing is when you're using force, it's an extremely dynamic situation. If you've ever been in a fight with an individual, nobody stands still and lets you strike them in the points that we're told to. And while that has offered some police, and let's be honest, an excuse to hit somebody in the head and then say, oh, that person was moving, it's very difficult to tell an honest officer that if you strike somebody by accident, in an area that we don't teach people to strike, that, that's it, end of story. Again, I think it's very difficult not to review those as a reasonable person would. And I think we hold ourselves to that standard. Was it reasonable under these circumstances, or should we have expected better? So I know that's not a perfect answer to that question, but that's what I believe, and I've been in those situations. And let me just say, I was a very active officer in patrol, and I had plenty of opportunities to engage folks in many different manners. And I understand what these officers are up against to the extent I can right now. And I don't want to take away from them their livelihood or their career. But I do want to make sure they're accountable, like I said earlier. So Sarah, I think that's all the questions I have. Do we have any from the Zoom question box?
I do. So I'll start with the ones that were submitted a little bit earlier on. So what do you see are any of your department's shortcomings? What are your goals for the department in the near future?
Yeah, so I hate to say right off the bat, I'd like to see us be a more diverse police department. I think that benefits everybody in Wheat Ridge, and it benefits our department. Obviously difficult to get there, but I think that's one of the reasons I was hired. I don't want to speak for Patrick. I hope I don't let you down if that was, but Wheat Ridge is a strong agency. I'd like to see us, review our policy, and I'd like to see us continue to expand our training into areas that sometimes we don't see, but an example of that is we don't see a lot of civil disturbance. So we don't train for it, but we've got to be more prepared for those things that are on the fringe, I think. And that's difficult for a smaller mid-sized agency to do. But I always look for more training. And, I think we have great relationships. One of the shortcomings is we had a great, relationship builder in the chief before me, and I haven't had that chance. So that's my shortcoming. I need to get out in the community, and I wish I could do that right now. So we'll work hard to overcome that. We'll work hard to make our policies better. I don't think all of our policies are where they need to be, quite frankly, but we'll work hard to get them there.
Okay. I've got another question. What's the best way to get involved as a citizen?
Well, I'm looking at 5 very involved citizens on my screen. I don't know if everybody can see them, but I think that's an excellent way, you know, and I think it was Ron who mentioned he went to the Citizens Police Academy. I know giving up personal time is difficult, but I think, you know, going to the police academy, I'm not sure, was it Dawn, did you mention the ride along program? Yeah, it's an excellent way to get out and view the world a little bit through a police officer's eyes and it connects us together, right? It allows the officers to see what, you know, what the citizens think and feel about them. And it also provides the citizens a view into what the officer's day might look like. So those are great ways. And I'm open to any other ways that folks are interested in expanding our opportunities to get out in the community. So it's a two-way street, and I look forward to feedback on that.
Chief, one thing that came in as a comment was the cadet program. It's another way for people to get involved if they have young people who are interested in law enforcement as a career. And information about that is on our website. So another question, based on your model of community policing, what are your expectations of your patrol officers given their time constraints responding to calls for service?
Yeah, that's tough because our officers are very busy. We don't have what, you know, one of the division chiefs was explaining to me today in the IACP review, the International Association of Chiefs of Police review. Our officers don't have the downtime that really is required of agencies that are fully engaged in community policing. We're so busy. And that's not to say we're short. We're waiting for a few folks to get out of the academy, but on an agency of this size, being down a few officers can really impact that. That being said, it doesn't detract from our mission, and we've got to continue to push forward as community police officers. And I think we have community police officers. That requires engagement in the community, and it involves problem solving and collaboration with the community. A lot of that comes actually from leadership. We have to take the time to go out there and meet with folks and collaborate and find out solutions. And gosh, I'm getting used to quite a few of the long-term issues that have you know, been around Wheat Ridge, and I'm seeing us starting to be able to peel the layers back and get at the problems. You know, I know we have problems with some of our hotel district up there on I-70 and Kipling. I know massage parlors, some of them are very legitimate businesses, and we have some that are not operating within what we would say the community values. But we're making progress on those, and that's part of community policing is problem solving these long-term problems. And I believe that, and I think, you know, those things, people have worked on those particular issues and other issues for a long time, but we'll solve them if we can really use the community as our multiplier in this, our force multiplier. We're not going to be able to do it alone. We're not going to be able to arrest our way out of it. We're going to need legislative help, you know, through our council. But I honestly believe community policing works. I've seen it work. And I know that if we can free up our officers to have enough time, they'll solve all of my problems. You know, I can go golfing or something because that's the type of people we have on this department.
We've got another comment about the SRO program. I unequivocally support our city in maintaining our relationship with our school district and the SRO program. I'm a school administrator in Adams 14, and I have interactions with 2 different police departments regularly. My students get to meet and interact with Officer Hadley in situations that are fun, non-threatening, and all the SROs I've ever worked with, 3 school districts and 4 police departments, have given students of high risk a positive first encounter with LEOs, have been incredibly supportive and absolutely a vital part of our school team.
Yeah, Sarah, I don't know if I heard every word on that question, but it sounded like that was really a comment on support for SROs and support for that program. And was the question, do we support that, or do we continue to support that, or?
It wasn't really a question, just a statement of support.
Well, we'll take any support we can get, but yeah, I wholeheartedly support that as a program in Wheat Ridge and really every school in the country. I think, you know, but I do think selecting the right people for that, and I go back to, you know, Ms. Lopez's comment, you know, we we have to be there for the right reasons with the right parameters. And we have to make sure that we review that often and make sure that everybody, educators, my dad was a teacher, and I respect educators immensely, but we have to have a frank conversation back and forth to say these are what we can and can't do, and this is what we want to avoid. We want to avoid the perception that we're here to arrest anybody. So thank you for the support in there.
We have a comment from a pastor of one of our safe stops, and we haven't, this hasn't come up on the call. And it may be that Division Chief Lorenz or Pickett could offer a little bit of history since the chief is so new, but the pastor says, I am the pastor of one of the safe stops. What can we do to support you and your department?
I certainly appreciate that. And yeah, I would love to hear from Division Chief Pickett or Division Chief Lorenz. I'm not sure which one is best suited to answer that. Dave, are you on?
I'm certainly trying to get on. So I think my point of view regarding that is they do so much to support us as it is. To have the safe stops available to police officers is really important. That having that place where an officer can go and rest for a minute or have their lunch or do their reports in complete safety is really important. It allows that officer to move their risk thinking level down a little bit. And I would like to say that is a fantastic program, and I couldn't think of any way that they could be more supportive.
Yeah, and so I asked Division Chief Pickett, who oversees our support services, and I know I probably will get chastised because it's probably a question that Division Chief Lorenz is better suited to answer. Jim, can you weigh in on that as well? I think those are important. Those are important relationships we have and important places for us.
Well, it doesn't hurt my feelings at all, but the Safe Stop, and I don't know if you are familiar with, I'm getting an echo here. I don't know if you're familiar with what the Safe Stop is, but it's a program that officers can use particular places in the city to take a break, to make phone calls, write reports. I know we had some comment in the past that this is some kind of a substation. It's really not a substation. It's a safe place for officers to go. One of the things that's difficult for officers to do, quite frankly, is go to the restroom in a public place when you have to remove a gun belt. It can be a difficult place unless it's very safe. And so if we have other places in the city that are available to us to do those kinds of things, that's a huge benefit to us. Besides the fact that the safe stops that are in our town are just the kindest people you could meet. They take care of us very well, so it's very appreciated.
I appreciate that. And I just wanted to make one other comment. Our chaplaincy program here is incredible. Chaplain Moore, he may very well be on the call, but he's been very instrumental in helping us understand officers in our community, as all of the faith community has been. I look forward to meeting them. I asked him, I think early on, if he could start setting something up, and of course shut down by COVID, but that's a fantastic group of people who are helpful to guiding us, again, trying to keep this topic on conversation, but to give us great feedback from the community about what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. So, Sarah?
Looks like the majority of the questions that we've got have been answered in our earlier Q&A or in your comments, Chief.
Okay.
Sarah, can we throw another one in real quick, or do we have some time?
Sure, we've got just a few minutes, Ron.
Okay, Chief. My question would be, and it's kind of a three-parter, and I know that the law enforcement community are definitely, nobody has standards like they do, and they follow them. Compared to the standards of city size of Wheat Ridge, or maybe a little bit larger, what is our ratio of men to women officers? And is it in compliance, or do you need to add more females? The second one is, what percent do we have of minority officers? And especially, we saw that with our Wheat Ridge Optimist Club, to have a bilingual officer when we were doing our Santa program is invaluable, that someone can speak Spanish. And I was wondering if you had that, or we can even talk about it later. And then the third one involves you, Patrick, also. With COVID, that took a big revenue chunk out of the city for 3 months. You have, I don't know if you can make it up at 6. I don't know. Things are going well. But what's your thought? Because obviously the biggest part of the pie is the police department when it comes to, I would guess, to revenue, very close, the biggest. And how will that affect chief for like positions in 2021? So I have 3 and 1, and I'm done.
Well, I appreciate you putting Mr. Goff on the spot on my behalf. But Patrick, if you don't mind, I'll answer the first couple of questions. I'm actually going to, because I don't remember the numbers as well as our human computer division chief Lorenz knows them, but he told me today what the male-female ratio was, men versus women on this police department, and I know it was good. Jim, can you remind me what it was exactly?
Oh, no, I'm on the spot, but I understand that the average percentage of female officers in the United States is about 14% per department. We are at about 22-23%. So we are higher than the average, but we're not where we would like to be, as the chief has talked about before in recruiting. It's a difficult process. I think we get better all the time, but we're doing what we can. As far as minorities go, I don't have those kinds of numbers for our department. I think we are fairly representative of the city of Wheat Ridge, but again, as the city, as the chief said, that's probably not our goal. Our goal is to be inclusive to the metro area and reflect that kind of diversity.
Thanks for that, Jim. I know we're underrepresented in the regional numbers for African American and Hispanic officers, and that'll be a focus of mine, and I will work hard to get there. As far as hiring in 2021, let me just say the city is, I joke with Mr. Goff about hiring, but they've been very kind to the police department, and through a lot of hard work. Division Chief Pickett was interim Chief Pickett for 6 months. They were, and Division Chief Lorenz, they did a lot of work to bring us up to full staffing where we are right now. I'd hate for this moment in policing to reduce our staffing for people to question that job. I hope that doesn't happen. But we're right now at full staffing, and that's tribute to the city's commitment to the police department. So, Mr. Goff, if you wanted to comment on that.
Sure. Yeah, the city has come a long way, and Ron, you know this, and I think some others, dealing with our fiscal sustainability. It was pretty disappointing and sad when COVID hit, because it just felt like we were on our stride, right? And but it's also a good thing, and the city is really set up, I think, for the future, and we still have a very bright future. It depends on how long COVID lasts, and if there's any significant spikes where we have to shut down again. But we ran 3 different scenarios, kind of a best case to worst case, and right now we're kind of following the best case model. I think we're looking at about sales tax about 12% down for the month of April. For retail sales in April, sales tax revenues that we received in May, we're about down 12% compared to last year. So, and that's about our best case. So I think things are getting better. We do have a selective hiring freeze though at this point. So we're just starting the 2021 budget process, and every position we will look at individually. I know school resource officer was a position that the police department wanted an additional one for. So, and I think a crime prevention officer. So those are a couple of positions that are on our 5-year staffing plan. So they're still there, and we're definitely going to consider them. I'm optimistic that revenues are going to look better than we expect. So,
did we get all your questions, Ron, in there?
Understand. Patrick or Chief, will we have when Clear Creek Crossing comes into fruition, is that due to open in 21? And if it does, Chief, have you considered, or Patrick, of a small substation over in Clear Creek Crossing being the kind of the location it is, or is the city just small enough that you can handle it without a small substation?
you know, we were, Ron, looking at a substation when it was a different type of development. Not saying that we won't again, and Chief Murtha and I really haven't had those discussions. But at one point, that development was going to be over 1 million square feet of retail. And that type of development, I think, is different, and you might need a substation. The development as we see it now is 300 units of residential, 26-acre medical campus, a couple of hotels. So I'm not sure if there's going to be a need for a substation. We are looking at, maybe the chief or Jim or Dave can answer this, but adding a different beat in the city to handle that side of town, including the Wheat Ridge Ward TOD station area too. So that's going to have an impact on the city. So I believe I was, if I'm not misunderstanding what they were looking at, and that might have been with the former chief, but we were looking at putting more resources in that whole I-70 corridor to deal with the Clear Creek Crossing project and the TOD center.
Yeah, I know in my conversations that the division chiefs and the former chief have looked hard, and that will be a different beat up there, and we've already anticipated and made adjustments in our staffing for that.
Chief, we've got one more question if we can ask. I know we're over time, and it's related to SROs. And does the model of new community policing include keeping SROs at our schools?
Is the question, does the model of community policing include SROs at the school?
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really what SROs do is almost a function of community policing. It's being out there, it's being engaged, it's problem solving together, it's getting, being proactive, getting ahead of issues before they become issues. So I think, it's a seamless dovetail together there. So yes, the answer simply is yes.
Okay. And I think in the interest of time, most of the questions that were asked in our Q&A were you addressed. So I think we respect everybody's time. This call has been recorded, so we'll be posting that online. Chief?
Yeah, so first, thank you to everybody who took time out to engage in a conversation and ask us questions. If you feel like, hey, I asked a question and it didn't get answered, please send that question to Wheat Ridge PIO, and Sarah will get us that question, and we'll get you an answer to that question, and we'll have that conversation. This is just the first conversation. I hope we can continue to have these conversations. I hope we can continue to get the engagement from our community. Special thanks to the community advisory group, certainly for taking time out tonight. I absolve you from having to listen to me again next week. But your feedback and your thoughtful comments are always appreciated, even when sometimes they're difficult conversations about the police and what you want to see. But we need that, and to the community that's on the Zoom call as well. So that being said, does anybody else have any closing comments, Mr. Goff?
Chief, yeah, I would just like to mention too, you mentioned this is just the beginning. Council members Dozeman and Hulteen are hosting a listening session next Tuesday evening. Same format as this, and really just to provide opportunities for citizens to tell their stories. And we want to listen and hear and address any issues that we can. So if you're listening tonight, and please spread the word, we'll get that information out if it's not on the city's website now, but that may be just one of the beginning of many continuing conversations to continue this conversation with our residents. So just want to make sure everybody knew about that.
Thanks. And Sarah, is there an opportunity for folks to join our CAG? Is that?
Yes, we posted that online tonight. So if you go to the homepage of the city website, you'll see a button for the police, and you can click on that. And it'll take you to information from the chief, where there's an application, information about the process to apply to the community advisory group. And we welcome any and all to join this group. And it meets every couple of months at 6 o'clock in the evening. Right now we're meeting on Zoom, but that'll change hopefully toward the end of the summer, and we'll be meeting back in person at 7500 West 29th Avenue.
Thanks, Sarah. Does anybody from the advisory group have any other thing they want to close with, or no? Look, I appreciate everybody's time. I wanted to make sure we valued the time. So forgive me if it feels like we didn't answer all your questions. I hope we have, but we'll continue to work on this together as part of your community. So Patrick, thank you for being here. Thank you to Sarah for moderating, and everybody else who tuned in. Have a great evening.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.